After my husband died, I took a few days off work to handle the funeral alone. My sister-in-law whispered, "He promised me half his life insurance." I laughed, pulled out the will, and said, "Too bad he changed it the night before he died and named you as a witness to my inheritance." My name is Nora Caldwell. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, where the pine trees seem taller than the sky and the wind has its own voice. I've always liked the quiet. Books, birds, the warm hum of an old kettle. I work as a librarian at the elementary school on Elm Ridge Lane. Been there 17 years. It's not glamorous, but it fits me. I'm not the type for noise. I prefer things to be neatly shelved: emotions, events, even grief, I suppose. But grief doesn't shelve easily. Everett, my husband, died on a Tuesday night in March. I found him the next morning, his face slack, the warmth already fading from his skin. I remember touching his cheek and whispering his name like it was the key to rewind time. But time is cruel and stubborn. He didn't stir. And then I was calling 911, and then I was telling them he was gone, and then they were saying, "Stroke," and "likely instant," and "we're sorry." The days that followed didn't feel like days. They felt like hours stitched together in no particular order. I was floating above myself, making funeral plans, answering phone calls, nodding when people said, "He was such a good man." He was. He really, really was. We were married for 26 years. Not a flashy marriage. We didn't throw parties. We didn't do big vacations or vow renewals or any of that. But we had a rhythm. He made the coffee, I watered the plants. He balanced the budget, I picked out the groceries. He snored like a freight train, and I'd always nudge him, half asleep, and he'd mutter, "Sorry, babe," and roll over. That rhythm is what I missed most at first. Not the man, not exactly, but the sound of him in the house. The weight of him in the room. His toothbrush in the cup, his socks on the floor, the way he always left one bite of food on his plate and said he was saving it for later. After the funeral, people offered to help, but I said no. I wanted the silence. I wanted to be alone in our house with the ghosts. I took a few days off work, canceled everything, and started going through his things slowly, methodically. Not because I needed to, but because I didn't know what else to do. It was on the third day after the funeral that Marcella showed up. Everett's sister. Marcella and I were never close. She was 4 years younger than him, a real estate agent down in Phoenix. Blonde, sharp, always dressed like she expected a camera crew to follow her around. We tolerated each other, mostly for Everett's sake. She was loud where I was quiet, flashy where I was plain, ambitious where I was content. I suppose she always saw me as dull. I always saw her as dramatic. She arrived without calling. I heard the tires on the gravel, then the unmistakable slam of the car door. She breezed into the house like she still had a key, except she didn't, so she knocked once and pushed the door open like she belonged. "I brought wine," she said, holding up a bottle like it was a peace offering. "I figured you could use a drink." I didn't want wine. I didn't want her. But I didn't say anything. I just led her into the kitchen. She poured 2 glasses and sat across from me. She talked about the service. Said Everett looked so peaceful and how hard it was seeing him like that. I nodded. She spoke as though we were close, as though this was shared grief. But I didn't feel it. I didn't feel anything but tired. Then, in the middle of some story about how Everett once helped her move apartments in college, she leaned in, her voice dropping like we were conspiring. "You know," she said, her eyes locking on mine, "he promised me half his life insurance." I blinked. I thought I misheard. "Excuse me?" She smiled, a tight, smug little thing, and nodded. "He told me years ago. Said if anything ever happened to him, he'd make sure I was taken care of. It was our little arrangement." I sat there for a moment, staring at her. Not speaking, just watching her. Then, without a word, I stood up, walked down the hall to the den, and opened the green file cabinet Everett always used. 3rd drawer, right side. That's where he kept all the important papers. I pulled out the envelope labeled "Will and Insurance," walked back into the kitchen, and laid the documents on the table between us. "You were the witness," I said, flipping to the last page. "He changed it 5 days before he died. You were there." Her eyes scanned the paper, and her face fell. Not dramatically, not the kind of fall you see in movies. No, it was slow, controlled. Her lips pressed into a tight line. Her jaw twitched. She stared at her own name on the witness line and looked back at me. "He wouldn't have done this," she said, almost whispering. He promised." I said nothing. I didn't need to. Marcella stood abruptly. The wine glass tipped, spilled red onto the tablecloth. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look at the mess. "I don't believe this," she snapped. You must have pressured him. He was sick. You manipulated him. He wasn't thinking clearly. I still didn't speak. She stormed out without another word, heels clacking hard against the tile. The front door slammed so hard it made the windows rattle. After she left, I cleaned up the wine. I sat back down at the table, and then I cried. Not because of her. Because I realized that Everett had done this for me. On purpose. On time. Despite whatever she'd tried to take from him. But something didn't sit right. Everett was a planner. A man who never rushed decisions. Changing a will just before death? It didn't feel like him. It felt desperate. The next morning, I called Roy Halpern, Everett's lawyer and longtime friend. Roy was the kind of man who wore suspenders and smelled like peppermints. Roy, I asked, why did Everett change the will? He was quiet for a moment, then cleared his throat. He came to me out of the blue. Said there were things he'd discovered. Financial things. He didn't name names, but he was angry. Hurt. Said someone close had taken advantage of him. That lit a fire in my chest. Did he say what exactly? No, Roy said. Only that he wasn't going to let a thief inherit from him. That night, I opened Everett's laptop. I knew the password. It was the name of our first dog, followed by the year we got married. I started going through his emails. Most were normal newsletters, boring work stuff. Then I found a folder marked Marcella. Inside were dozens of emails. Most from her. Requests for money. Investment opportunities. Real estate ventures that sounded shady even on paper. She promised huge returns. Everett wired her money several times, large amounts. $30,000 here. $15,000 there. But near the end, his emails became short, colder. Where's the return? I need documentation. Why haven't you responded? Her replies stopped completely 2 weeks before his death. And then I found a draft. Never sent. The subject line was, in case I don't wake up. It wasn't finished. Just a few lines. Nora, I need to tell you the truth. About Marcella. About the money. I made a mistake. I was trying to protect you. It stopped there. I stared at the screen for hours. That one unfinished sentence was heavier than 1,000 words. He knew. She took from him. Lied to him. He confronted her, maybe too late. Maybe not. But he made sure I was protected. That was Everett's last gift to me. After reading that unfinished draft, I didn't sleep much. I lay in our bed, the sheets still smelling faintly of him. The room felt too quiet, like the walls were listening. The words kept circling in my mind. I made a mistake. I was trying to protect you. From what? From who? I already knew part of the answer, but not all of it. And when someone you love dies, the need for answers becomes relentless. It's not even about closure. It's about understanding the person you thought you knew. Understanding how their final days were spent, what they were thinking, feeling, fearing. I started digging. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice, really. It was something deeper. A need to follow the thread he left behind. To finish the sentence he couldn't. I printed out the emails. I highlighted the dates and amounts. I traced every wire transfer from our joint account, which I hadn't looked at in months. I saw where the money had gone, multiple transfers over the last year, totaling nearly $190,000. Some of it had been pulled from his retirement fund. Without telling me. I tried to stay calm, but it was like discovering a secret life. Not an affair. Worse, in some ways, a betrayal of trust, not by Everett, but by someone who claimed to love him. Someone who bled him financially while smiling to his face. Marcella had always been reckless. Flashy car, constant renovations on a house she never stayed in for long, photos on social media with luxury handbags, champagne brunches. I'd always assumed she had the money to back it up. Or maybe a string of wealthy clients. But it was Everett. He'd been her safety net. And toward the end, I think he realized she'd never planned to pay it back. It took everything in me not to drive to Phoenix and confront her. But I didn't. I waited. I called Roy again. I sent him the emails, the bank statements, the draft message. He didn't say much at first, just sighed heavily on the phone. I had no idea it went this deep, he said finally. This isn't just family drama anymore. This could get ugly. I wasn't afraid of ugly. I was afraid of losing Everett again. Not the man, but the memory of him. The idea of him. The part of him that I'd trusted unconditionally. I didn't want to remember him as a man tricked and drained in his final days. I didn't want to remember his death as something wrapped in guilt and regret. But that was the reality. Still, he tried to make it right. Even if it was late. Even if it wasn't perfect. I kept thinking about that, how he pulled himself out of denial long enough to change the will, how he named Marcella as a witness, as if daring her to argue it later. like he was forcing her to sign away her lies. I couldn't decide if it was genius or just a sad irony. A week passed. Then I received the letter. Marcella had hired a lawyer. She was contesting the will. Claimed Everett was not of sound mind. Claimed I had coerced him. Claimed she had been financially dependent on him and had a verbal agreement. The gall of it made me sick. I handed it to Roy, who barely glanced at it before tossing it on his desk. She doesn't have a case, he said. Let her waste her money. But it wasn't just legal anymore. It became personal. She started calling. Blocked numbers, unknown numbers. I didn't answer, but the voicemails were venom. He was going to take care of me. You're not the only one who loved him. You always resented that we were close. Resentment? I wasn't the one who begged for money. I wasn't the one who let him die with an empty bank account and an unfinished letter. And yet, she pushed and pushed, like if she could just talk long enough, yell loud enough, rewrite history forcefully enough, she could make her story the truth. I began to wonder how long it had really been going on. Was it just the last year? Or had she always seen Everett as her backup plan? I went to the bank again, asked for archived records. Some of the earliest payments went back 2 years, then 3, then 5. Small amounts at first, $2,000 here, $4,000 there. At the time, we were doing okay. Everett had told me we were investing in a side project. I didn't ask questions. I trusted him. Now I realized what the project had been, saving his sister from herself. Quietly. Over and over. Until the day he couldn't anymore. The part that broke me wasn't the money. It was imagining him trying to reconcile the sister he loved with the person she became. Imagining him sitting in Roy's office, signing that will, knowing it meant cutting her off, maybe forever. Knowing she'd come after me. But doing it anyway. That's what love looks like when it's exhausted. When it stops pretending. One day, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I brought coffee, sat on the grass beside the grave, and just talked. I read your letter, I said. I found the emails. I know what she did. The wind was cold, sharper than usual. A storm was coming in. I pulled my coat tighter around me. I'm not angry at you, I whispered. But I wish you'd told me sooner. I could have helped. You didn't have to carry it alone. There was no answer, of course. Just wind through the trees, the sound of cars in the distance. But it felt like something settled in that moment. Like I'd said something that needed to be said, even if it was too late to matter. 2 days later, Marcella showed up at the house. She didn't call ahead. She just pulled into the driveway, climbed the steps, and knocked, not like someone seeking peace, but like someone demanding a verdict. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She looked tired. Less polished than usual. No makeup, hair pulled back. Her eyes darted past me, like she expected Everett to be standing in the hall. This is ridiculous, she said. I shouldn't have to fight for what he promised me. I said nothing. She stepped closer. You know he felt guilty. You know that, right? That's why he gave me that money. He knew he owed me. That stopped me cold. Owed you. I repeated. He left me with nothing when our parents died, she said. He got everything, the house, the savings. I got scraps. He always said he'd make it up to me. And he did, I said, my voice steady. Until he realized you were never going to stop taking. She blinked. He changed the will because he saw it, I continued. All of it. He knew. You used him. You drained him. And in the end, he tried to fix it. Marcella's eyes filled, but whether with grief or rage, I couldn't tell. I thought we were family, she whispered. You were, I said. Until you made him choose between us. She didn't answer. She turned, walked down the steps, and drove away. I watched her go, and something inside me unclenched. But I knew it wasn't over. After Marcella drove away that morning, I stood on the porch for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the empty road, listening to the rumble of her car fade into the quiet. A neighbor's wind chime tinkled in the breeze. A mourning dove cooed somewhere overhead. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was walking around half submerged in fog. I knew this wasn't over. Her lawsuit was still active. She was still going after Everett's estate, despite the ironclad will, despite the evidence, despite what she had done. But there was something about seeing her face when I told her, directly, plainly, that he chose to protect me in the end. It wasn't just about the money. It never really was. It was about how much damage one person could do under the illusion of love. Marcella hadn't expected to lose. Not really. People like her rarely do. They live their lives assuming the pieces will fall into place around them, that charm, tears, or noise will eventually bend reality to their liking. But she was forgetting something. Everett may have been quiet, maybe even naive sometimes, but when he made a decision, he stuck to it. And the day he changed that will, he wasn't confused or scared. He was resolute. I knew that now. Still, knowing wasn't enough. Not legally. Roy called me later that week. "She's subpoenaing Everett's medical records," he said, voice flat, trying to prove he was mentally incompetent. I closed my eyes, breathed in slow. "And? She won't find what she's looking for." He passed a full cognitive exam 10 days before he signed the new will. "I have the report. She's wasting her time." That was a relief, but only a partial one. The more she pushed, the more I realized I couldn't just sit and wait for the dust to settle. I needed to protect not just Everett's wishes, but the truth. So I made a decision. I scheduled a meeting with a forensic accountant, a quiet, older man named Stephen Elwood who reminded me a little of my grandfather. He wore tweed, carried a leather briefcase, and asked precise, surgical questions. I gave him everything. The emails, the bank statements, the printouts from Everett's computer. I told him to trace every dollar Everett had sent Marcella over the last 5 years. "I'm not trying to bury her," I said, "but I won't let her bury him either." Stephen nodded slowly. "I understand." It took 3 weeks. During that time, I went back to work at the library. The kids were a welcome distraction. Nothing forces you to stay present quite like helping a second grader find a book on dinosaurs. My coworkers gave me space, which I appreciated. They didn't ask questions. They just brought me tea and covered the louder classrooms. At night, I kept busy. I reorganized the pantry, alphabetized my spice rack, sorted the laundry room, even repainted the guest bedroom. I think part of me was terrified of sitting still, of letting the grief back in. But some nights, when the house was too quiet and the wind scraped against the windows, I'd sit on the couch with one of Everett's old flannel shirts draped across my lap. And I'd let myself remember him, not the last weeks, not the sickness or the silence, but the years before. The night he danced with me in the kitchen to an old Billie Holiday record. The time he built me a greenhouse in the backyard just because I said I missed having fresh basil. The way he looked at me like I was made of more than skin and bone, like I was home. When Stephen finally called, my hands shook picking up the phone. "We've completed the trace," he said. "It's extensive." He emailed me the report. It was nearly 60 pages long. Charts, bank records, summaries. A full financial autopsy. Everett had sent Marcella a total of $243,800 over 7 years. Some of it had been listed as investments, some as loans, some as gifts. But Stephen noted multiple inconsistencies. The properties she claimed he invested in didn't exist. The companies were shell operations or dissolved shortly after the transfers. One LLC was registered under a different name but traced back to a P.O. box linked to her home address. It wasn't just deception. It was calculated, repeated, brazen. Stephen had even found emails between Marcella and a man named Vance, someone she'd dated briefly, where she mentioned Everett's money as a sure thing. I stared at that sentence until it blurred. A sure thing. That's what she thought of him. Not a brother. Not a person. Just a safety net. An ATM in a cardigan who loved her too much to say no. I forwarded the entire report to Roy. He didn't respond right away. But the next morning, he called and said, "We'll be filing a countersuit." Fraud. Misrepresentation. Potential criminal inquiry. It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. 2 days later, a different lawyer called me, one representing Marcella now. Not the same man who filed the first claim. This one sounded weary. Apologetic. She'd like to settle, he said. Privately. Quietly. I almost laughed. After everything. She's willing to withdraw her claim in exchange for a non-disclosure and mutual drop of all suits. I paused. And the money? She won't pursue it. She understands that it's gone. I didn't answer right away. Because something inside me knew. This wasn't about fear of legal loss. It was fear of exposure. Of what would come out if this went public. If her clients, her friends, her reputation saw the kind of woman who siphoned money from her dying brother while calling it love. I told him I'd think about it. Then I hung up and sat down in Everett's old recliner. The same one he always sat in when he paid the bills, read the news, sipped his coffee. I looked around our house, still ours, even if he wasn't physically there anymore. I thought about how much of himself he gave to her. And how, in the end, he gave everything that mattered to me. And I wondered, was that enough? I didn't respond to her lawyer right away. I let the offer sit for 2 weeks while I went about my life, teaching, grocery shopping, returning to yoga on Saturday mornings. The weight on my chest was lighter. Not gone, but no longer crushing. And every day, I got a little more comfortable in the quiet. Then I walked into Roy's office with the folder in my hands and said, "We're not settling." He looked up at me over his glasses, gave a small nod, and said, "Good." That was the beginning of the end for Marcella. The lawsuit went ahead. Depositions were scheduled. Her financial records were subpoenaed. The report Stephen put together was airtight, page after page of wire transfers, fake entities, and emails that left little room for misinterpretation. The forensic trail made it impossible to deny the fraud. And Roy? He knew exactly how to dismantle someone who'd built their life on half-truths and pity. When it became clear we weren't backing down, Marcella tried a different tactic. She reached out personally, a handwritten letter left in my mailbox, as if that somehow made it more genuine. She called me sister, said she regretted how things unfolded, claimed she never meant to hurt Everett. It was 4 pages of flowery language, self-pity, and subtle manipulation. I didn't respond. Instead, I gave the letter to Roy, who filed it into the discovery folder. The hearing was set for February. By then, the local paper had caught wind of the case. Not the scandalous details, not yet, but enough that people started whispering. Clients began pulling out of her design business. A contractor she owed money to filed a lien against one of her properties. Another tried to sue for unpaid invoices. It unraveled fast. The week before the hearing, Marcella's new lawyer called again. This time, his tone was different, tired, almost defeated. "She's willing to sign a full confession," he said. "She'll admit to the misappropriation of funds, drop the contestation of the will, and agree to repay what she can." I asked Roy to add one condition. "I want it on public record," I said. "The whole confession. Not sealed. Not negotiated behind closed doors. It needs to be known." He hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I think we can arrange that." Marcella agreed. She had no real choice left. The court hearing lasted less than 45 minutes. Her confession was read aloud, submitted into evidence, and entered into the record. I sat in the courtroom, my hands folded in my lap, and listened to her words spoken in the third person by her attorney. She knowingly received funds under false pretenses. She misrepresented investment opportunities. She exploited her familial relationship for personal financial gain. There were maybe 15 people in the courtroom. 2 reporters. One from the local paper, one from a niche business journal. They both took notes. One of them recorded audio. I didn't look at Marcella while it was happening. I didn't need to. I wasn't interested in seeing her cry, or slump, or show whatever version of regret she thought might buy her sympathy. That moment wasn't about her anymore. It was about Everett. It was about his memory. And it was about truth, finally, winning over manipulation. She signed the confession. The court ruled in my favor. All claims against the estate were dismissed. Her financial liability was formalized, nearly $250,000 in damages, plus legal fees. The court ordered garnishment of any future income above a certain threshold. She lost her business. A few months later, I heard she'd moved to a small apartment in Mesa and taken up freelance work, the kind of quiet, low-profile clients that didn't ask questions about the past. The settlement money wasn't the point. I donated most of it to the hospice center that cared for Everett, to a nonprofit supporting caregivers, and to the local library foundation. Everett would have liked that. He wasn't a man who cared about wealth. He cared about people, about legacy, about doing the right thing, even when it was hard. After the dust settled, I finally opened the last email he ever sent me, one I hadn't been able to touch before, not even after he passed. It was short, just a few lines. Subject: just in case if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to say it out loud. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry for the burden I left behind, but I made sure you'd have what you needed. And I hope you use it to build something beautiful, even if it's just peace. I love you. Always. I closed the laptop, and this time, I did cry. Not from anger. Not from grief. But from relief. Because after everything, the lies, the silence, the betrayal, I finally felt like I had something Everett had always wanted for both of us. Clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is its own kind of justice.